Good morning, everyone. Welcome to KFAS Talks. Today, we will be sharing highlights of a recently published study. It was funded by KFAS and conducted by Marmor. Today's presentation will take approximately 45 minutes, followed by a Q&A session at the end. So if you have any questions, please put them in the right-hand side of the screen in the box so that we can capture them and hopefully answer them at the end. Today's speaker is Raghu, who is the CEO of Marmor. He has dedicated 22 years to the Gulf region. He's a CFA charter, and he's also a certified financial risk manager. I hope you enjoyed today's talk. Raghu, the screen is yours.
Thank you, Aisha, for that generous introduction. Good morning to all of you, and welcome to this presentation. It's a very prestigious project executed by Marmor for KFAS, and we thank KFAS for providing us with this opportunity to us. And I am very glad to share the findings. At some stage, I think the full report will be available on KFAS website as well. And I would urge all of you to read through the 100-page plus report that is dedicated to this subject. So let me start my presentation. Hopefully, I think you can all see this, the slides. It's a very a prestigious project, as I said before, because it focuses on one of the most important aspects of Kuwait ecosystem, which is procurements. Now, we all know that the government spending is very high in economies like Kuwait, and government is the main um, budget owner for the economy, and therefore they run a lot of ministries, and in the process they oversee a lot of development work for Kuwait, which necessitates them to really procure goods and services for executing their projects. So procurement is at the heart of everything, and we this is the project objective where we took a greater deep dive look into what does the public procurement process in Kuwait looks like, and how we can really improve the operational side of the procurement process, so that we can involve private sector, especially the SMEs, in the public procurement process. So very simply, this project or this study analyzes the current system and then identifies the gaps, and based on that we suggest some executable operational strategies to increase the process efficiency and basically encourage participation from the private sector. So this study involved both secondary research and primary research. The primary research would comprise structured discussions with key stakeholders, mainly government officials, private organizations, consultants, SMEs, and then we also supplemented that with a host of desk research, and hence this is a combination of both this methodology. So before we jump in, I will give you an outline of what I'm going to talk today. I will start with the project landscape in Kuwait, and then the economic structure, and what are the current systems and practices, especially with regard to procurement process in Kuwait, and then try to understand the challenges in the existing system, and move on to the operational strategy by looking at some of the global case studies to enhance basically the procurement process, so that we can really achieve some larger objectives, and in the process also include SMEs in the economic development agenda of Kuwait. And then we will suggest some pointers in terms of how to increase the efficiency and broaden the macroeconomic outcomes. So essentially, I will end the presentation with a strategic roadmap for implementing these proposed solutions. So, before we dwell into the topic, it's very important to define what procurement is all about. Very simply, public procurement refers to the government purchases. Government includes state-owned enterprises as well of goods and services, and it's a sequence of activity starting with a need assessment by the government on what is really required. Of course, it operates under various ministries, and then inviting bids, awarding contracts, managing the contract, and making the final payment. So, this is broadly what the public procurement is all about. But why is it so important? It's important because Kuwait spends nearly 13.4% of its GDP, which translates to about 5.4 billion K per year, on buying of these goods and services. And they all pertain to extremely large sectors like utilities, power, water, transport, waste management, health, education. And therefore, it becomes very important to see how this can be done very efficiently. Um, Globally, the public sector or the government has used procurement as a tool to increase jobs, growth, and investments, and also to encourage the growth of SMEs and therefore the development of the private sector. So, the same objective is being espoused here as well, and we wanted to target the a very similar outcome for Kuwait as well. So, so let me start with the landscape. As you can, you may all be very familiar now that Kuwait is very oil dependent. A 20-year data clearly shows how we are not able to shake this out. And also, our expenditure profile is more oriented towards wages and salaries and subsidies, which is generally defined as current expenditure with very little capital expenditure. These are primarily the two major challenge from an economic perspective. So we are dependent on oil revenues, and on the expenditure side, we are skewed towards current expenditure more than capital expenditure. Now, obviously, if you're dependent on oil revenues, you are a victim of oil prices. And some years oil price like now can be good, but there are years when oil prices are not that good. And also the expenditure keeps increasing as the number of people who enter the job market increases. So technically, what has been a surplus economy has now turned into a deficit economy for the last few years, as you can see in this graph. And the deficit is projected to increase in the next 2 years. And you can see that some of the ministries like electricity, water, health, defense, they are considerable spenders of budget, even expressed as a percentage of total expenditure. So, on the one hand, you have the challenge of fiscal imbalance. Excuse me. You are moving the slide, but we are seeing only the first page of the slide. Because you are reading from the slide. 1 minute to read the slide. Just excuse me for a second. Now you, I mean, go to the next 1 minute. I'll just check now. We are not able to see the slides. I think the slides are not moving, so we're just checking. Give me a second. Put it that way. Now it is working. Okay. Thank you, Nitraj. Yes, I was talking about the reliance of Kuwait on oil revenues and spending, and therefore there is a need for controlling this fiscal deficit, which can happen only when we broad base and include the private sector in the job creation as well as economic growth agenda. So that becomes the cornerstone for the economy, and therefore the public procurement process becomes very important in that sense. Now, public procurement is also very important policy lever to develop SME sector in Kuwait. As you can see from the data on the left, the public procurement as a percentage of GDP is one of the highest when benchmarked with some of the global economies like US, and therefore we have significant investments in the form of projects. I have listed out some examples of projects and their size. So, but nevertheless, we know that project expenditure is a very important driver of the economic growth. But look at the SME contribution in Kuwait. The SME's contribution to GDP is just 10%, whereas the global average is about 45%. And numbers in China or EU is even much higher, or even our own UAE is about 53%. So there is a huge gap to close in terms of encouraging SMEs to participate in this economic challenge process. Today, the SMEs are mostly concentrated in the low margin industries like construction and wholesale and retail, and therefore there is a lot of headroom for SMEs to really play a much bigger role than what they are doing now. So that's the landscape of Kuwait projects. Before I jump onto the Kuwait procurement system, probably we will quickly launch a poll question for all of you to really get engaged into this conversation. Here is the poll. The question is, which of the below would be part of a public procurement? Option A, purchase of firearms for defense. Option B, expansion of airport terminals. Option C, purchase of computer systems by, say, judicial department. And option D, all of the above. So please provide your answer and then we can move on. We have a nice spread of answers, even though the right answer is D, all of the above. That's very interesting. So let me move to the presentation now. Okay, so here we want to basically explain how the public procurement system in Kuwait works. We have a very interesting architecture of the public procurement system in Kuwait. For projects which are more than 100,000 KD, we have a state audit bureau through the Kuwait National Assembly playing a role here in terms of auditing of payments and deciding on the projects. Anything above 75,000 KD is controlled by the Council of Ministers and the respective ministries and public authorities. So here is where you have this Central Agency for Public Tenders, also called as CAPT, that takes on the responsibility of inviting tenders and accepting bid offers and basically approving the amendments and all the technicalities involved with respect to the project awards. Of course, the Ministry of Finance is involved in budget allocation and approval of procurement financing as well. So, um, moving on, the most important aspect of
This mouse because slides are not moving.
okay.
Just click one slide and get one sheet.
The key aspects of procurement system, as you can see here, borders on multiple verticals. You have basically the basic features of a procurement process starts with assessing the needs, calling for the tender, and inviting bids, and evaluating the bids, awarding the contract, managing the project, and getting the performance guarantee, and finally, once the work is done, payment of money to the suppliers. And then you also have a second leg where we may have to address the complaint mechanism. And we also have a third leg where we looked at the efficiency part of the procurement process, which essentially measures the time taken for procurement. And finally, we'll spend a significant amount of time trying to understand how the e-procurement aspect of it can be a solution to the pain points that we have identified. So, moving on, basically, on the first leg of the public procurement process, where we identified the areas to be assessing the needs and evaluating bids or inviting bids and evaluating the bids, all the way up to the payment of suppliers, there are significant gaps that we identified in the existing system. For example, at a need assessment stage, there is no consultation between the procuring entity and the private sector. And also, there is no one place for market analysis guidelines during the market research phase. So, every time a new project is announced and bids are invited, the aspirants have to do a market analysis by reinventing the wheel. And also, there is no fixed time frame in place for the procuring entity to address any queries that bidders might. And also, unsuccessful bidders are not notified or debriefed as to why they have failed to get the bid. And from a project management point of view, the purchasing entity does not have the obligation to inform the other bidders about any variations that might come in terms of the post-award contracts. And from an SME point of view, there is no one centralized institution that can consider some sort of a special case scenario for, say, giving performance guarantees so that more SMEs can participate in the whole process. And finally, when it comes to payment of suppliers, there is no minimum time frame for the purchasing entity to process the payment, which leads to significant delay in the payments. So, now, definitely, some of the pain points that I've explained can easily be solved by using technology. It's what we call as the e-procurement platform. Kuwait has an e-procurement platform, but in the entire chain, value chain of procurement, you can see that the e-procurement aspects touches upon very minimally in terms of the whole process. For example, today, the call for tender and award decisions are available on the e-procurement platforms and also notifying the decisions. But then there are many areas like bid submission, bid opening, performance guarantees, signing of contracts, that can be done easily through the e-procurement platform, but which is not being done so far. We have observed that some of the countries have successfully managed to um, digitize the entire process of procurement by moving on to the technology, and this is what basically we are suggesting, that the technologies should cover all the sections of the public procurement process, not just two of them. So operationally, the challenges from an e-procurement point of view is that it's more designed today as an information rather than a transaction. So in this world of e-commerce, I think enabling one to do a transaction-based system can be very significantly important. And also, there is a lot of back-end linkages that can be designed in the e-procurement system. One important aspect is that, as I explained earlier, any project less than 75,000 KD a direct order can be placed by the concerned ministries. This probably excludes the SME participation. So it will be a great idea to bring even these contracts onto the e-procurement platform, and this will also enable pooling of contracts and achieving economies of scale. And even, for example, financial guarantees from a bank might be a very difficult thing for an SME to get. And e-procurement can find some solutions around this process. So before I jump on to the operational strategies, again, I will take a small poll break, and I will ask my colleagues to initiate the next poll question, and let's see how the response is. Over to you. Here we go. So the question is approximately how much Kuwait spends on public sector procurement on an annual basis. We have four choices: 1 billion, 2 billion, 5 billion, and 10 billion. So please let us know what you think. We have 30 seconds to respond. Okay, so we have a very skew here. A lot of people think that it's 10 billion, whereas the right answer is about 5 billion. Interesting. So let's now jump to the operational strategy of what exactly we are proposing as improvement points for the public procurement system in Kuwait. We studied three pillars. The first pillar is about application of technology. The second pillar is about capacity building. And the third pillar is about process improvements. In order to find exactly what type of a strategy we should formulate, we have looked at some nice case studies from across the world, all the way from South Korea to Norway. And we have presented our detailed findings in the report on these case studies. So I'm going to just focus on two case studies. One is from Korea. The Korean online e-procurement system, also called as KONEPS, is an integrated e-procurement system through which they reduced the time taken in terms of the full cycle from 375 days to really 161 days. So it takes only 161 days in Korea to go through the full process of public procurement, whereas it takes about 375 days in Kuwait. So literally, That's half of what it takes in Kuwait. That's because they focused a lot of their energy into what is called as back-end linkages. So when you have this back-end linkages, then suppliers who registers with the e-procurement system need not again and again submit the same document because it will all be available in the back end for easy access. So that's a very interesting example of how we can do the same thing in half the time. And the second example is a very interesting one from India. It's called the e-marketplace, also called as the government e-marketplace or GEM. Now, what happens is here is that there is an aggregation of requirements that happens, and therefore, SMEs can look at getting a much bigger slice of the cake rather than individual pieces of contracts. So, for example, across the ministries, if there is a requirement for, say, desktop computers, instead of each ministry trying to place a tender for their own requirements, they can aggregate these requirements and then post them as one unified e-marketplace. So this is actually providing economies of scale for both the government as well as the private sector. So this two case studies, and apart from that, as I mentioned, there are more case studies that are explained in the report, which one can look at for more ideas. So this is the KPIs for this government market portal of India. They've reduced the delivery time from 30 to 60 days earlier to now 10 to 15 days, and the prices are now lower by 15 to 20%. So there is across the board benefit that everyone accrued because of the demand aggregation actually. So this also increased the SME participation in government tenders, and also it increased to a lot of transparency because everyone can see the log of purchase right on the website as they speak. So how do we really increase the SME participation in public procurement? Now, as we have seen before, starts with a very limited resource SMEs possess, and technical constraints actually limit their participation. They're too small in size, and therefore, if we allow joint bidding, then it can really encourage more SMEs to come together and bid for the same contract. Also, in terms of financial guarantees, as I have mentioned before, it may not be easy for SMEs to go and get a financial guarantee from a bank, and if they can relax this requirement, that would be very nice encouragement for SMEs. The entire digitization process can actually reduce the time consumption and paper-based procedures, and all this is expected to increase the participation of SMEs. Sorry. So how do we actually increase the efficiency and broader impact? Before I get into the numbers, let me quickly take another poll break with the next set of questions for you. So that's a very trick question. What constitutes a quote? Option A, an Oscar Wilde quote. Option B, a price that could be increased during project execution. And option C, a promise by a supplier to carry out at a designated specified price. It looks like an easy question because everyone is veering towards the right answer, which is C. That's interesting. So let me jump back to the presentation. Okay, so basically here is where we tackle the main problem. as to how do we really make the public procurement process very efficient and have a broader impact on the macroeconomy of Kuwait. So basically, if you look at the current mm, pre-contract and post-contract, what we call as ex ante and ex post. It starts with how much time it takes to submit your bid, how much time it takes to award the contract, the time it takes to sign the contract, and then the time it takes to start the work. So basically, average time taken during a bidding phase in Kuwait is about 375 days. That's one full year. And there are many costs to the government, including cost incurred towards resolving complaints and legal costs. And the same thing for the private sector and SMEs who are bidding for the project. So now, on the time taken to the first part that I explained so far is only about the bid aspect of it. And then actually when it comes to the contract management phase. We have time taken here as well, which breaks down into, say, for example, if there is any amendment to the project or there are any additional works required by the government or if there are any disagreements with the inspection and what have you. That on an average takes about 420 days. So, sorry. If you add these two, that's about 800 days. And we did a study to see how the e-procurement or technology aspect can really reduce this time taken. And according to our calculation, if all the legs of the procurement process are digitized and made technology friendly, that time can come from nearly 800 days to about 562 days. So that's an end-to-end e-procurement benefit that one can aspire. We also did some number crunching. I'm not going to go through it in very detail, but I'm going to present a very high-level uh, uh, calculation that, of course, the report gives you more details. But there are, in terms of the total public procurement market, which we have estimated up to 2030, using the IMF GDP projections. So we have transaction costs that can happen ex ante, that is before the project commences, and ex post, that is after the project commences. The transaction cost is estimated to be about 2% before and 4% after. So now we know what is the overall transaction cost. And then we have a cost saving that can accrue through the e-procurement process. Even if you start the e-procurement project today, our assumption is it will take about 3 to 4 years for the full functionality or suite to get kicked in. And therefore, we believe that it will be a non-linear type of a benefit that will accrue over the time, and the best benefit will come only from 2025 all the way to 2030. So essentially, our calculation shows that we can save about 2% of the total procurement of the government through this effort. And similarly, in terms of payment efficiency, which is basically a working capital issue, today the definition is about 60 days, which can easily get improved to say 28 days as per our calculation, and that translates into a huge savings in working capital as well. So the former is a capital capex, the later is working capital, and if you add both of this, then you have we made some assumptions in terms of the pass-through multiplier. We gave a higher multiplier to capex at 0.85 and the lower multiplier to working capital at 0.5, and here is where we feel that there will be an incremental GDP to accrue by improving the process. So definitely there are benefits to be accrued, but how do we go about this? So in terms of the first aspect is what are the metrics that we can define very clearly as KPIs. KPIs are key performance indicators to monitor progress. So if you don't have KPIs, if you can't measure something, you will miss it out. So basically, at every step of the way, whether it is a smart contract or process audits or training programs, capacity building, we have clearly shown what type of a KPIs can be formulated. And once you have that, then it is much easier to really aggregate data and track progress. Here is the architecture which we are suggesting, and it starts right below at the systems and data level, what we call as the data lake. So everything starts with the data that we have, and we need to build on this data in terms of embedding various suites, procurement suites on top of this data, either to improve our strategy or to improve our contract sourcing or to improve our payment mechanism or to improve the audit and compliance. So as you can see, once we today we know that we have an ERP mostly in place in many organizations and ministries, but if we can take this data and build on that through contract management and supplier management, as we have depicted here, then we cross half the bridge. And then we can use big data, artificial intelligence, blockchain, and RPAs to really create that core digital multi-purpose, aspirations for technology. And finally, that will enable one to clearly visualize the data through apps and add-ons and tools. So the mapping is very clear in terms of how we can go about. And in terms of the roadmap for end-to-end digitization, we have basically to initiate the platform, which starts with the onboarding of project team, and then we need to validate it through pilot runs, and then once we launch the platform, then we have to start onboarding the SMEs and vendors and using various support processes as well, including digitization and analytics. So that's basically the scheme. Sorry. So before I close my presentation with the summary points, I will see if we have any more poll questions. Probably, I think we have one more poll question to go, which I'm happy to launch now. So the question is, what would be the contribution of SMEs to Kuwait's overall economic activity in terms of GDP? Is it more than 40%, 20%, 10%, or less than 5%? That's interesting because it's a very spread out answer. 27% of the participants think it is over 40%, 45% think it's less than 5%. So the truth is somewhere in between, which is 10%. So let me conclude my presentation by walking you through the summary of the whole process. Basically, what we have explained is that Kuwait, being a major government spender, should embrace uh, things that can increase the efficiency of its procurement process through digitization. Not only parts of it, but the entire process chain of procurement should be digitized so that the back-end data linkages are very strong. We need to create an e-marketplace so that SMEs can participate seamlessly. We can use smart contracts using technology like blockchain, and this will save a lot of time as well as cost. We can simplify documentation requirements. Also, from a capacity building point of view, this report proposes a very interesting idea of something called as a public procurement practitioner. A public procurement practitioner can undertake some certification courses offered by World Bank and UNDP, and they will have a formal role through professional training, and it can also be a career opportunity because having seasoned people champion the public procurement process is extremely important to realize the objectives of this exercise. And therefore, in summary, I would say that this is a very key area for Kuwait, not much researched, and therefore this is the first research that has happened at this level in terms of taking a deep look at what are the problems of the procurement process in Kuwait and how can it be increased to basically involve private sector in the diversification of Kuwait economy. Therefore, we can aim for more SME participation and solve some of the economic challenges that Kuwait faces, both medium term as well as long term. So I'm very happy that we got this opportunity to do this project, and I again thank KFAS for this wonderful study. Marmor, as you know, is a regional research company, which is a subsidiary of Kuwait Financial Center or Markaz. We have published more than 700 reports. We have executed several projects, and our website, marmormina.com, can be a repository for a lot of information and research and data that one looks not only for GCC but for Kuwait as well. So we encourage you to visit our website and write to us in case you have any requirements in terms of data research or even intelligence. Thank you very much, and I'm very happy to take questions now.
Thank you for the great informative presentation. I think we have about a couple of questions. Okay, so the first question, what role does blockchain play in public procurement? Are countries adopting it?
Excellent question, because blockchain is not still a very proven formal technology. It's not in the mainstream, but it is really gaining speed. Definitely, there are. We have showcased in the report some of the countries that have used blockchain as an answer to, especially the documentation process. How blockchain can be really useful is that you cannot manipulate a blockchain based data. So once it is there in the system, it is hardwired, and therefore it will not be amenable to manipulation. As you know, the most important problem with government contracts is that we can easily manipulate things. So that is where blockchain comes in. And yes, there are countries that are experimenting with it, but not on a very large scale, I would say.
Great. Question, what could be done to improve success rate of SMEs in public procurement?
Yes, we said that one very easy idea to implement would be to allow SMEs to joint bid. So instead of treating each entity as a very independent organization, because SMEs can be too small, if they are allowed to come together and bid for a particular project, that should be very much encouraged, because that will improve their chances of getting a project from the government, and that will actually encourage more and more people to participate in the whole process.
Great. And I think we have one last question. Do you believe these measures can help reduce corruption significantly?
Absolutely. Any use of technology definitely is aimed towards tackling corruption as an issue. We have seen this across our lives as we, you know, use technology. Today, there is no life without technology. And the technology or digitization, especially in government public procurement process, is mainly aimed to really cut the red tape, cut the bureaucracy, and improve the chances of marginal small players like SMEs to really work with the government. Absolutely, yes.
What process of procurement are amenable to automation?
Okay, as I explained, it starts with needs assessment, uh, all the way to inviting bids, evaluating bids, providing the contracts, and then managing the project and making payment. The entire process is ripe for automation. There is no leg that cannot be automated, in my view. So today, as I've shown, there are only a couple of areas that are automated, but the entire process can be automated in my view.
I think those are the questions so far. Thank you so much for the informative presentation, and for the audience, I hope you enjoyed the talk. And also, you'll be able to find the study on the KFAS website. And thank you, Raghu, for the presentation.
Thank you, Aisha. Thank you, KFAS, for making this happen today. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Have a good day. Bye.